Does Zodiac Academy include SA in these stories? That's a very good question. It's also something that requires a lot of respect in order to answer it, and it's a very nuanced response, and there's going to be differing opinions. But I'm going to go ahead and give my review for whether or not Zodiac Academy includes SA in these stories. So trigger warning, SA will be discussed as I give this review for whether or not SA is in this book. As I answer that question, you need to know about that trigger warning. As a result, I will also be using the words sexual assault as I talk about this, because I do think it's important that we actually say what we're talking about, at least in regards to this context. If that's not something you want to be a part of, that is okay. I respect that. Please feel free to swipe. For the rest of you who want to stay, let's get into it. First off, what are my credentials for having a voice on this topic? First of all, I have been a domestic violence and sexual assault advocate, so I will be answering this question in regards to being an advocate for individuals who have experienced DV and SA. Does that mean I know everything? No. Does that mean that my viewpoint is the only viewpoint? No. Does it mean that my viewpoint is the correct, right, only viewpoint? No. It is simply my perspective that I will share. If you disagree, that's okay. That's awesome. We are designed as a species to have varying perspectives, experiences, and opinions, and that's wonderful. If you would like to share about that, please do so respectfully in the comments. Feel free to disagree with anything or everything I have to share, but I'm still going to share it, and we'll see how this goes. Now, disclaimer. I have only read the first 3 books of Zodiac Academy. Zodiac Academy: The Awakening, Ruthless Fae, and The Reckoning. Keep in mind, I did read all 3 of those books in the newly published editions. I just don't like these covers as much, which is why I will be doing this whole video with the original covers, but I did read the updated new editions. I made a whole video on this, and I had a whole theory for book 1 after I finished book 1, and then book 2 and book 3 ruined that theory. I will still share that theory with you, but yeah, it got ruined. Last disclaimer, this is not going to be a spoiler video because I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to talk about plot devices. I am trying to keep this as very basic as possible, but I will give examples. Again, I won't name who those examples involve, the context of those situations for the plot, but I will tell you what happened in order to answer this question. So keep that in mind. To start this conversation, I think it's important to first touch on whether or not Zodiac Academy should be listed as a bully romance, which is one of its current titles. And my answer to that question is no. The reason is that the word bullying is way too broad in order to be truly informative for future readers. What do I mean by this? For DV and SA advocates, bullying is synonymous with abuse. They're the same behaviors. The difference is where they happen. So abuse or domestic violence or domestic abuse is something we usually talk about happening within a family structure. So within a home, within a familial community, or something along those lines, okay? That's where that term is used. The term bullying is predominantly used in academic settings, so middle school, high school, college, forms of harassment and abuse that happen in those spaces, the word bullying is used. When we're talking the workplace, usually the word harassment is the one that is predominantly used. But all in all, these terms are actually the same thing because they're the same behaviors. They're efforts from a person or people to have power and control over other individuals, and they engage in behaviors that are a pattern, a development of a pattern in order to have power and control over others. And they do it in a variety of ways. You can emotionally abuse people, verbally abuse, and physically abuse. These are also big umbrella terms. But again, if they happen in an academic setting, we often use the word bullying. So what does bullying include on the vast spectrum? Well, bullying includes giving someone a side eye every single day or glaring at someone every single day. That is a form of emotional abuse, and it has a psychological effect on the victims of that form of abuse. They feel fear, they don't feel included, there is a constant state of anxiety and stress. So glaring at someone every single day, that's emotional bullying, also known as emotional abuse. Bullying can also look like verbal, spreading rumors about a person, speaking badly about them repeatedly, verbally threatening them. Those are all forms of verbal abuse, also known as verbal bullying, also known as verbal harassment. Bullying also includes physical. This can include things like slapping somebody, pushing somebody, punching somebody, any range of the severity of physical violence that can occur. The court is going to look at that and probably use the word assault in the way they describe it. Domestic violence advocates are going to use the word physical abuse and physical assault as well. And there's also the same would be in the case of a workplace. But keep in mind, physical bullying includes shoving repeatedly, shoving a person, and also includes taking the person and beating the crap out of them behind a building, okay? The range of physical harm that can exist is quite broad. Furthermore, physical abuse has a smaller umbrella underneath it called sexual abuse. And that is where physical harm is done, but specifically in regards to a sexual manner. Now, it's also important to know that sexual harassment is broader. It can also incorporate verbal harassment. It can also be emotional, okay? So sexual abuse actually spans the entire range of what bullying can be considered involved in. Okay, so the word bullying incorporates so many behaviors ranging from repeatedly glaring at somebody to full-on sexual assault. That word is too broad. It's just too broad. Even the word abuse is very broad in what it applies to, and there can be a lot of frustration because some people will be accused of abuse and they'll be like, but I never laid a hand on them. And it's like, okay, well, you didn't engage in physical abuse doesn't mean you didn't engage in verbal or emotional abuse. That is still something that's confused about in our world. So I don't like the word bullying to be used in regards to Zodiac Academy because it doesn't tell you, the reader, any valuable information for how in depth the bullying gets. It's very severe in this book. The sexual harassment is intense in Zodiac Academy Book 1. And this is what really leads to whether or not people say that Book 1 has sexual assault in it. Where's the line that can be drawn on that? And the fact is, it's gray. It's really gray. It's difficult to determine how we're going to delineate one versus the other. The law looks at certain things in certain ways. It also depends on where you are. So, for example, Title IX is the law associated with sexual assault and harassment that happens on college campuses, that happens in the academic setting. Those laws are stricter than the laws for the general public. So even there's nuancial differences, okay? It's a complex topic. So let's explore whether or not, while I was reading this book, I felt as a domestic violence and sexual assault advocate that SA happened in this book. First, let me start this off by saying, if I was sitting in my office and the characters from this book who are experiencing the sexual harassment that they're experiencing the abuse that they are experiencing, came into my office, told me what was happening, and they told me, I think I've been sexually assaulted. My answer as a domestic violence and sexual assault advocate is, I understand, that's a valid feeling. How can I help you? How can I support you? How do you want to move forward? My job is not actually to correct them. My job is not to rewrite the reality that they are sharing with me under my determinations of what I think did or didn't happen. Not my job. In fact, it can be so much more harmful if I try to shove terms or take away terms away from victims, survivors, who are coming to talk to me about what happened. If a person comes in and they share what happened here and they said, I don't think it was assault, I do feel like it was harassment, you know what my job is? My job is to say, okay, that's valid. How do you want to move forward? How can I help you? Do you want counseling support? Do you feel like you need to get out of the place that you currently are? Do you need escape? Do you need shelter? Do you need legal counsel and legal support? We have a legal team who can tell you how to operate on that angle. Like, that's my job as an advocate, is not to tell them, no, it is SA, or no, it's not SA. That's not my job. My job is to offer support. The person who survived the encounter gets to decide what that reality experience means for them, how they want to define it. Now, if a person comes to me and they said, this is what happened, I don't know how to think about it, I don't know what this means. My job as an advocate would be to educate. So I would start explaining kind of what I explained already a little bit to you all with regards to bullying, what are the different forms of abuse that can happen, the different forms of sexual assault and sexual harassment. And then again, I would allow the person themselves to determine how they wanted to perceptually evaluate their lived experience. It belongs to them, not to me. It belongs to them. So with that being said, in this book, the two characters who are experiencing the very intense sexual harassment and abuse that happens here, they never, ever use the word sexual assault, rape in this book. It does not happen, not even once. They don't even talk about it as a fear, okay? Never. So if they came into my office and they said all these things happen and they, just like the characters in this book, they don't use the word sexual assault, they don't use the word rape, and they're stepping away from that, my job is not to put it on them. My job is to say, how can I help you? So in that way, because the characters themselves are not defining what's happening to them as sexual assault, I as an advocate would not force that identification onto them, period. Now, another complex point about this is if a male was the one who wrote this book, I would feel differently, just because these are about female characters experiencing this experience, and we have a history of males in our country not fully understanding what sexual harassment and sexual assault is for females, how it's experienced, and the consequences it has. That's the history that we have. It's not understood well enough. So another reason why I am okay with stepping away from the term sexual assault as a describer for this book is because it's written by two females about characters who are females going through this experience. And none of those females involved, the authors who are real people or the fictional female characters, none of them are using those terms. So I won't either. It's okay if you completely disagree. That's totally okay. With that being said, the sexual harassment is severe. Okay? An example to give is there's one character who physically holds down another character on the ground, arms above the head, and is biting into them. Definitely physical assault is happening at that point in time because there's so much discussion of sex and discussion of libidos and feeling attracted and all this stuff. It really complicates that scenario to be beyond just physical assault. it feels like it is breaching into sexual assault because it is one character forcing themselves onto another character, forcing a part of their body into that character, i.e. their fangs. I can totally see why people would attribute that as a sexual attack. Totally understand that. However, it is important to note that genitalia doesn't have any part with regards to the assaults in this book. It doesn't. There's no grabbing or biting those areas. There's no genitalia just doesn't have a part in the sexual harassment that happens in this book. As a result, again, I'm more inclined to allow us not to use the term sexual assault for describing Zodiac Academy because of that fact. Again, if these characters came into the real world, we would have a different experience. The other thing is that the things that happen in this book, if they did happen in the real world, would lead to SA, would lead to rape. That would be the outcome of those situations. In our world, they have been the outcome. I totally understand why people feel like this book promotes rape culture, promotes romanticizing sexual assault. I completely get why you feel that way. There's a validity to that feeling. While I was reading this book, though, I really kind of started to notice, especially about 3/4 of the way through, that this story, this form of fantasy for me needs to be read a little differently. And what I mean by that is when I read other fantasies, I like to dive into the stories, be in their world, try to be the characters in a way too. That's how I enjoy reading fantasy. This is a completely different way of reading fantasy for me because I don't feel very connected to these characters because their lived experience is very different than mine. Even if you take away the magic and them being thrown into a new world, their academic experience, which is very much like a college freshman, the first month of being a freshman in college, their experience is so vastly different from mine because I was not somebody who drank in college. I didn't go party. I was academically focused exclusively. That was my interest. I did not have any intention of forming romantic relationships or sexual relationships with anybody. I didn't care about that. So my experience is vastly different from theirs. So I couldn't be these characters. All I could do was observe them. And I also was trying to figure out how I wanted to handle the presence of sexual harassment with the whole, but the guys are so hot, annoying statement. And I realized that I could be wrong, but I think this has more to do with the direction in which the reader is choosing to approach fantasy. And what I mean by that is there was this person, I can't find the video for her, I'm so sorry, but she mentioned how one of the reasons why individuals who've experienced domestic violence and sexual assault might be very drawn to reading dark romances is because those books allow for those readers to, in a way, re-experience the trauma that's happened to them in a safer space because it's within the pages of a book. If they want to close the book, they can close it. If they want to throw it across the room, they can. If they want to set it on fire, they can. But they're in control more now as the reader. And the authors, if done well, these dark romances can allow a person who's experienced those hard things to re-experience them safely, go in the pace they want to go, reading as fast or as slow as they want to, and then the authors can rewrite the story, can rewrite the ending, can rewrite what happened. And that's the fantasy. The fantasy is being allowed a different conclusion to the trauma that's already happened to the reader. The reader is already aware that this is a fantasy, that it's not reality. But it's nicer to play in that reality, have the intentions behind the characters, the outcomes of their behaviors, the relationship conclusion be different. The readers get an opportunity to have a different ending than potentially what they had in their real lives. And that's cathartic and enjoyable and healing. So I took that approach while reading this, although I have never experienced personally what has happened in this story, obviously with regards to the magical part, but even the sexual harassment that's happened, I've never experienced it to this extent as a female in the American culture. Of course, I've experienced sexual harassment, but not to this level, nowhere near to this level. But there are individuals in our world who absolutely have. This gives those individuals an opportunity to re-experience some of those traumas and have them rewritten a little bit, especially when we get into book 2 and book 3, because book 2 gets to be the revenge arc you always wish you had. And book 3 gets to be a really reinforcing that the characters were never intending to rape or sexually assault the other characters. That hits very strongly in this book, that that's not the intention. And we see this through both verbally stating, I'm not going to rape her, or I'm not a rapist. That's mentioned multiple times in this book, but it's very hit hard. We don't do that here. So this book really tries to hone in on these characters do not do SA. That's not part of it. They're rewriting the narrative that a lot of readers maybe had a different experience with. That's what makes this fantasy. It's a fantasy that these characters aren't actually intending to be harmful in that way. That's what makes this fantasy. It's reliving the experience and having A, more control over it because you can choose how much you want to read or how little, and B, the authors rewrite it for you. What if the event that happened didn't end the way that it did in the real world? What if that person actually wasn't bad, actually wasn't intending to cause sexual harm, actually wasn't pursuing that goal? What if that never actually happened? What if we skirted the edge of it, but it never happened because it wasn't actually in the intention? And what if it was true? What if our fantasy can be that the denial that we had in the relationship before that awful thing happened, what if the denial was real? What if those characters were never actually evil in our lives? We can play with that narrative in these books because obviously you can't in the real world. That's where I think these 3 books have value, because it's an opportunity for those who have experienced the harassment, the sexual assault, the rape, the horrible, horrible things that can happen. They can relive the impulsivity of their youth, the carefreeness that they had, and the outcome of it isn't going to be the pain it was in their real life. The outcome could be something different. That's the fantasy. That's the value for these books, I think. Again, I've only read books 1 through 3. So, to conclude, do I think sexual assault has happened in these books? I'm going to say no. It is okay if you want to say yes. I understand completely. Do I think there's sexual harassment? Yes, and it's very intense and very extreme for book 1, for sure. It makes it very uncomfortable to read book 1, for sure. Do I think the authors are really trying to take away that narrative by book 3? Yes. So that's kind of how I'm approaching the end, my determination with regards to this story. Now, here's for the theory that I thought was the case in book 1. Because sexual harassment, sexual assault were words that were never used, never referenced as even a possibility. For a second there, I thought in this book, maybe that's just a behavior that doesn't exist in this universe. And that was a kind of cool thing to play with for a while. What if the worst possible thing that could ever happen is sexual harassment? And sexual harassment's awful. It sucks. But what if that was the worst? Besides murder. I love how I just besides murder. But what if rape and sexual assault just weren't a thing? And for book 1, that really feels like that's kind of true because it's never referenced. Date rape, that word, those 2 words are referenced 1 time in book 2 and never again at all. Book 3 is where we have repeatedly the main characters stating over and over again, we aren't going to rape anybody. That's not who we are. They say it to themselves. They say it in their own internal dialogue. They tell other people this. They also really hone in on not pushing physical, touching or anything if the other character is pushing them away. So there's a lot of backing off that happens in book 3 that I really think is trying to kind of lower down the chaos and the really intense sexual harassment that in our world would totally lead to SA that was happening in book 1. This is trying to really bring it down and say, no, these characters would never do that. And that's why we can have romantic relationships between the characters. So that's where I think this comes in. And those are my viewpoints with regards to the question of if Zodiac Academy has an essay in it. Again, I only read the first 3 books, and also you're allowed to disagree with me. That's okay. If you read this and it really came off in a different way, it felt really invasive for you and hard to read and uncomfortable and just not good for you, Zodiac Academy is not the series for you, and that's okay. But also, I just want to acknowledge that for those who read this, who are like, no, this helped heal something in me. This helped heal either a fear I've had or a past experience I've had or a past experience I know somebody has had. Maybe it brought a little bit of that, a little bit of the fantasy of rewriting that story. You know the reality. We live in the reality. That's why fantasy exists, so we can get out of it for a bit. I respect that. So that's my determination with regards to that question, with regards to Zodiac Academy, the first 3 books. Keep reading what you love, and I will see you next time.